About some things, there's no disagreement. Women came out of the Depression in the late 1930s with a strong message that they belonged in the labor force only if they needed to work. Preparations for war expanded the need for workers and ate into the unemployment figures. After 1939, when World War II began in Europe and the U.S. prepared for war, the unemployment rate among men declined drastically. And after December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor, a palpable shortage of workers led employers to seek out women workers. Different women now heard different messages. On the one hand, patriotism required mothers to stay at home. They and their children could help the war effort by growing victory gardens of vegetables and fruits in their backyards, by saving tin cans and recycling products like cooking grease. Obeying rationing rules and making the most of meatless days without complaint would help the war effort and release household money to buy war bonds. On the other hand, patriotism required every woman to do her bit. 3 million women volunteered to roll bandages and prepare medical kits at the Red Cross. Others joined auxiliary branches of the armed services, but the vast majority heeded the call to take up jobs that had been vacated by men drafted into the military. In 1940, with war preparations ramping up, still only about 30% of employers were willing to hire women for available jobs. The remaining 70%, echoing the job scarcity of the Depression years, claimed that male workers were not willing to work with women. After all, women were only temporary, low-wage workers, not serious about their jobs and not worth the effort of training them. By 1942, just a couple of years later, attitudes had changed. Employers faced now with a real shortage of men were willing to hire women in more than 50% of available jobs. In short, they opened up jobs to whoever was available to do them. Some large employers provided laundry services for their workers, prepared meals for them to take home, and safe transportation for night workers. But even then, employers stayed away from hiring married women with children. As the war continued, the United States Employment Services and the War Manpower Commission tried to encourage even married women with children to take jobs. To make that possible, Congress passed legislation providing child care for women with children. A new attitude now prevailed. If women could find appropriate care for their children, war work demanded their presence. Suddenly, barriers against women working for pay outside the home dropped, even for women with children. We can see the effect of these changes in the rising numbers of women in the workforce, but we also see the continuing ambivalence to employing women with children in the consistent failure to provide them with adequate services. Stores and banks closed before women got out of work. Very little prepared food existed. Laundries were too expensive even for women with wartime pay, and they weren't convenient or readily available. Transportation was hard to come by. Housing shortages made it expensive to relocate families to areas where war plants and military industries flourished. Sometimes the prefab houses constructed for new workers lacked schools and churches and amenities like playgrounds and grocery stores. To manage childcare, some women workers made use of family members or neighbors. Others found places in the rare child care centers, but government-funded child care was never adequate. It was poorly placed and underutilized. Horrendous stories leaked into the papers, stories of children being locked in cars all day while their mothers worked, or of latchkey children asked to let themselves in after school and feed themselves and their younger siblings. Still, when we look at the data, we see what happened. In 1930, about 10 million women worked for wages. Less than a third of them were married. In 1940, about 13 million women worked for wages, and only a third of them were married. The number of women workers spiked at around 19 million at the war's peak. By 1950, after the war was over, 16 million women remained in the labor force. Half of them were married. Something had changed. By the 60s and 70s, larger and larger proportions of those working would be married women. These figures precede and alert us to the moment we now live in. Neither marriage nor children any longer excludes women from wage work. Rather, the presence of children now makes it more, not less, likely that women will work for pay.